Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 on uNDeterred. I'm here with Pat Hart and Jamie Salzler. My name is Lisa Hermosillo, and I'm very glad that you guys are here today. I kind of wanted to kick off the episode today just talking a little bit about what it means to have really good governance. I had seen a post from Rep. Carla Rose Hansen. I love following her. I really look up to her in a lot of different ways. But today she had posted a picture of herself and Rep. Schatz. And she just talked about their great relationship and how they work together to really get good legislation through. And despite their differences and their views on things, how important it is to maintain those relationships. And I just really encourage a lot of people to pay attention to that and to pay attention to people who do make posts like that, because I think it really does speak highly of us as Democrats, that we really do work hard to work across the aisle. And that's really important to a lot of people. And I hope that Republicans appreciate that too. And maybe we'll see that a little bit further down the road where they feel comfortable sharing their relationships that they have with their Democratic colleagues.
Well, yeah, and what I like and what I want to call out is, as we're talking about these long form interviews we have on the podcast, I see Democrats pushing a lot of bills that really support and uplift not only their constituency in their district, but the people all across the state. And, as you guys know, Jamie, Lisa, like 16 elected, and we're going to pass hopefully up to, 50 plus bills. Last cycle, we passed over 55 bills. And why I bring that up as we're talking about good governments is because that small caucus of Democrats is really working across the aisle with their peer group to pass legislation that is really meaningful and hits hard. And I think that is it's just, I guess, a testament of what Democrats are in it. We're not in it for power. We're in it for good governance. And I think we're going to see that with Josh a little bit later, Josh Boschee. But, we've talked about good governments before, and really uplifting people, I think, is a cornerstone of that.
I think if you look at what's happened in the legislative session this year so far, it's unfortunately they're continuing to focus on some of these kind of culture war type issues and not on the issues that are really helping people. There is yet a final property tax plan that is an issue people really care about. We're not seeing anything that's really helping incomes go up. We're not seeing anything that's helping renters. But what we are seeing is some of this giveaways to private schools. So tax dollars going to private schools that only are going to benefit a few people in the state, because there's so many folks who don't even have access to private schools if they even wanted to use some of that money for that. And I think that's good government is about trying to figure out what is it that people really need and try to serve that need. And what we're seeing too often in Bismarck is that's not happening this legislative session. There are certainly some wins that are coming through. I think our Democratic NPL legislators are working really hard, but they're just kind of battling this wave of sometimes pretty crazy ideas, unfortunately, or just bad ideas.
Well, yeah, and I think Josh and I hit on this in the interview about how many bad bills have been defeated. A couple of weeks ago we were talking about seeing up to or over 1,000 bills introduced. Many of the bad culture bills have been shot down, and I don't know if that's enough. One thing that we touch on, and what's really got my mind curious, is if we do split session into annual sessions, what impact does that have on having, a cultural cycle, culture bills, and a budget cycle, if we're going to focus on policy, or, if we're going to still have crossover 20 or 30 days into a 40-day session. And, regardless of how that happens, I really hope that we can come out of this cycle looking forward and looking at good policy and good governments and what we really need to do to make sure that the roads are graveled and the roads are paved and the schools stay open.
Totally agreed.
So I guess with that, you guys, I'd like to introduce the interview with Josh Boschee. Josh is District 44, formerly House, now Senator Boshee. Josh is honest, hardworking. He's been in the legislature for 13 years, I believe. And I hope we can get several more cycles with him. So appreciate you watching. And here's to Josh. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around through the intro. Like we said, we have none other than Josh Boschee, our District 44 Senator out of Fargo. And what I have to do is think about where District 44 is, but that's Fargo downtown, north through NDSU.
Correct. Well, we surround NDSU. So yeah, we start at Main Avenue, downtown Fargo. We go up to 28th Avenue North, and then we skirt the main campus. The main campus is a different district. We have everything that surrounds it.
Just out of curiosity, who has NDSU campus? What district is that?
So that's District 45.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep. So that district has main campus and goes north of us all the way up to Trail County, their border.
No, I've had you at this pedestal of House rep for many years, but you switched to Senate this last cycle or 2 cycles ago.
Yeah. Well, you and your running mate decided to go statewide.
Yeah.
So we lost our senator in District
Sure.
44. And so, Representative Carla Rose Hansen and I duked it out. It was more that she didn't want to go over to the Senate.
Yeah.
So I got to the lucky straw and head over to the Senate, and I've loved it. It's been a little bit different vibe than the House. So
Okay.
we've been able to fill my seat with Representative Austin Foss, which has been a blessing to our caucus.
Austin's been amazing. His floor speech a couple of weeks ago went, I'll say viral for North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
I think it says 25 or 28,000 views, which is
wow.
amazing. And what it rains down to me is just like, let people be.
Right. Yeah. Well, especially when so many of my Republican colleagues, want the government to stay out of their lives, but they love to create laws to get involved in other people's lives. And,
Right.
the resolution you're talking about that Austin spoke about, House Concurrent Resolution 3013, which sends a letter to the Supreme Court saying, please define marriage as one man and one woman. And, it just does nothing but hurt people and then hurt the image of our state. And
Right.
so we have it over in the Senate now. There's a number of Republican House members who, since that vote, have come and been like, I wish I could change my vote. And a lot of that is because people reached out to them after the vote. People in their lives, friends, family, coworkers. So encourage folks to keep reaching out to your senators, because we're counting noses now, and we hope to defeat the bill in the Senate.
Well, and you know what? And I kind of I have all these weird thoughts all the time. I think about, like, I'm glad that they changed their mind and they wish they would have voted. I hope that's not just lip service.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's always incremental change. And it's not good that it passed.
Right.
That's the baseline.
Absolutely.
But in the fact that it did pass, if we can get people to change their minds about it, I think there's some silver lining in that as well.
Well, I think so too. And like I've told the advocates who are working to defeat House Concurrent Resolution 3013, the bathroom bill that's going to ruin a bunch of our elementary schools throughout the state. There's a bill to allow conversion therapy or a form of it. My hope is that, well, first of all, let me back up. We've done a good job of defeating a lot of the culture bills.
Yeah.
Kudos to our Republican colleagues who have been like, we're done. We are sick of having these conversations. Let's talk about the issues that matter. So they've partnered with us in defeating those bills. But with the few that remain, I think the silver lining is, as people are seeing how others are second guessing their vote, specifically on the marriage resolution, we're hoping that trickles over to some of these others and say, why do we continue to allow bills to move forward that are intended to hurt people, that are intended to keep, the unintended consequence, of course, is that people don't want to call North Dakota home. When we're talking about who someone loves, when we're talking about which bathroom someone uses, those things are not issues that everyone's raising their hand saying, last week someone came in my bathroom that shouldn't be in the bathroom, right? They want school meals paid for.
Right.
They want to make sure we're addressing property taxes, making sure that we're preparing for if Medicaid cuts happen, which are likely under this Republican administration in DC. How is North Dakota going to back up our rural hospitals and our nursing homes, and making sure that we continue to fund recovery and addiction services, all of which are covered by Medicaid?
Yeah, no, I mean, you just kind of hit the whole gamut there. We need to look out for people. And I do think that government provides good.
Yeah.
It's in my soul. We've talked about it before. how do the Democrats differ from the Republicans? And I think Democrats understand and know that government helps. And I feel like Republicans are on this burn it down theory lately, especially nationally. But we'll get to that in a minute. Now, hey, I got a wild card for you. You ready?
Okay.
Didn't prep you for this one. All throughout campaign season, throughout the many years that I've been in politics, now almost a decade, people say North Dakota Democrats need to put distance between national Democrats. I kind of have mixed feelings on that. But one thing that I feel is that we are defined outward to inward and inward to outward. How would you want Democrats to be defined, North Dakota Democrats?
Well, I think first and foremost that we put North Dakotans first. It's not about my ideology or what I believe and what you believe, and that's what we're going to push. It's about how do we make sure, again, that the school buses are running on time, kids are in a safe place for school, grandma and grandpa have a safe place to retire or live, whether they're in their home or in a retirement community. Making sure that North Dakotans who live outside of the 4 largest cities have access to health care and behavioral health access and things like that. So, certainly it's hard to cut through the noise of different media infrastructure and how people get their information and to separate us from what the national brand is. But I'm also hopeful, as being someone who's a past DNC member and you're involved with the DNC, that instead of this continuation of the DNC looking down at rural red states or flyover states and patting us on the head and saying, that's cute, we'll have a rural caucus, right? That they're starting to say, what should we be talking about? Sure. How do we make sure that we can build back and continue to be an advocate for rural communities as diverse as they are to make sure that we're fighting for all of America? And so, that's my hope is that, again, letting our actions shine. But the reality is we have to talk more about that. And we have to make sure that folks within our party are certainly holding us accountable, but not focusing the swords inward as much as it happens, but also, our common enemy right now is fascism and the authoritarian state and the ability to make sure that we have a court system that works for everybody. So, we have to stand up with each other and continue to work to, hopefully overcome the damage that's likely coming from this national administration. Yeah, no, I can't believe it's only been 60 days. Right. The first 10 were hard on me. I really appreciated your videos. Was it week 4 or week 5 of session? And you came home and you just said, hey, I don't know what to say either. I'm dealing with session. Everyone's hurting. And, we're all in this together. And I appreciated that video. Thanks. Well, that's reality. People reach out to folks like us saying, how can I get involved? What can I do? I call my congressional delegation. I'm reaching out to my state senator, but they're not responding, or I feel like it's effortless. And it's like, well, we can't let them get off the hook by saying they didn't hear from anybody. Right. And then in the meantime, really, I believe in how are we building community? How are we making sure at a time where we have record loneliness and people are dealing with feeling isolated, that we're providing opportunity space for people to connect with each other that are like-minded, having coffee hours, happy hours, meet gatherings where it's just connection. It doesn't always have to be a rally and a protest, which certainly are important as we look to continue to stand up and stand out. But more importantly, how we build connections. Well, that makes me think about, I'm sure you've met Adam Martin, right? Oh yes, my gosh, we took a picture together a couple of years ago. He had said something in a panel that I was privy to, and he said that communities have forgotten how to be communities. And I hope that neighbors start talking to each other, especially post-COVID. I hope we can come together again because there was that isolation. But I'm going to pivot back to session. Sure. So you're in the Senate. What committees are you on this cycle? So I'm serve on the Senate Education Committee and the Senate Workforce Committee, both of which have been great to be a part of, especially as we talk about private school vouchers, talking about school meals, talking about how do we make sure North Dakota is a state that everyone wants to call home, regardless of their profession. It's been a fun experience being on those committees. What bills have you sponsored any bills or? Yes, I've introduced, I believe it's 11 bills and resolutions. Oh my gosh. My intended to only do 5. Yep. But once we got here and people started reaching out, so a number of the bills are constituent bills. And at this point of filming this, 10 of 11 have passed in some variation. So, I think a testament to that, I'm not just throwing stuff against the wall. I'm really working on things and trying to find relationship or partnerships with stakeholder groups and Republican colleagues to make sure that these bills are successful. So it just came from a hearing. It was a resolution, but it passed the House Government and Veterans Affairs Committee, looking to make sure that we can maybe create an EMS worker line of duty memorial at the Capitol grounds. So trying to recognize the important role that EMS, especially whether volunteer or career, play in our communities and those that have lost their lives, trying to take care of their neighbors.
Oh my gosh, like needed, right? Let's recognize those who have stepped up. What else have you sponsored? Can you name all 11?
Well, that's going to be this, right? And so I got to start rattling them off.
Give me a couple.
So one that I've learned a lot about is a transit funding bill. So the cities of Minot and Fargo, because of our state's growth and those communities' growth, have received different federal designation now because of their population growth. So with that comes less federal money because of their growth. So, COVID helped a lot of our communities with transportation dollars to cover some of that shortfall. Well, COVID dollars are spent now. So we're asking for a one-time allocation to Fargo, Grand Forks, Bismarck, and Minot, who have what are called fixed route transit systems. So Route A, Route B, and then they also have the paratransit for folks with disabilities, that program. And so a one-time allocation to help cover some of their deficits, but then spending the next year and a half studying the current funding formula for transportation funding from the state and seeing if there's a better way that we can do that.
Okay.
So that's one of the bills. The other one I had introduced initially, again, going back to EMS workers, but also law enforcement, firefighters, search and rescue, 911 operators, recognizing that we're continuing to have these conversations in what I feel is piecemealing different solutions to different problems as it comes to recruitment and retention of volunteers and workforce, funding for new equipment, coverage of services throughout the state. So I had proposed initially putting in $25 million of legacy fund earnings into a public safety and emergency services fund, that those stakeholder groups would then be able to create a program to get some support from the state. So it's ongoing funding. It's the stakeholders who know it closest, helping develop some grants to help out communities large and small. I didn't expect it to go too far, knowing that it was a big ask coming from a Democrat. But I was pleasantly surprised that the committee that heard it on the Senate side, they said, well, we're not going to be able to allocate $25 million towards this, but it's worthy of continuing the conversation. So they converted it to a study. And so the goal is to get it past the House so that we can bring those stakeholder groups together in the next year and a half and talk about how do we make sure that response times are appropriate for ambulance services throughout the state? How do we make sure, as we have bigger threat of things like wildfire, that we are recruiting and retaining fire folks? How do we make sure that when some of these small communities, their law enforcement closes up because they can no longer afford it, that puts an additional burden on the county sheriff? How do we make sure we can provide support to those so that people have safe communities live in? When they call 911, someone can show up in a timely manner. So really looking holistically at some of those things.
Well, I'm gonna bridge that slightly. In my last two roles, both as a lieutenant governor candidate and as chair, I got to make good relationships with the railroad lobbyists, for lack of a better word, the union members, and they're doing double trains. And all of a sudden the railroads and the setbacks aren't set up for doubles. And there's situations where ambulances can't get across a railroad train because there's 250 cars and they have to go 35 minutes around. And that service time is incredible.
Especially when it's your loved one that's in a car accident or a domestic violence situation, or, a kid is injured at a basketball game, when you call 911, you want someone to show up quick.
Exactly.
And I think it's important, especially from a guy from Fargo, I really try to frame it with folks about when we talk about rural. I drive to Bismarck now twice a week, several times a month. I go to visit my family in Minot during holidays. I go to McLean County to go to my family cabin. I visit friends all over the state. People hunt and fish throughout the state, right? We use the state, but we want to make sure that if something happens, regardless of where we're at, that there's a first responder able to do that.
Absolutely.
Those of us from Bismarck, Minot, Fargo, Grand Forks, we pay for those services through our property taxes, as do many of the communities throughout the state, but they're just not able to generate enough revenue to maybe have a professional force or to have all those different emergency services covered. And so, again, I think the state can play an important role in that as we look at how do we make sure everyone has access to services when they need them.
Well, and another thing that you touched on is the rural hospitals. And obviously there's a lot of uncertainty with the federal government. And I'm really worried about the small regional hospitals. Like we're in a hub. I'm from Pembina, North Dakota. We rely on Cavalier. Cavalier relies on Langdon. But if those start drying up, not only is there a lack of the maybe long-term care facilities, the emergency room services, but also the training grounds for those EMS, volunteer units. So like there's this huge domino effect to those dollars drying up.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important for North Dakotans to remember, North Dakota was one of the first Republican-led states to pass Medicaid expansion. That was 2013. Okay. So that meant that we were able to keep a lot of our rural critical access hospitals, the ones you talked about, and many more throughout the state, open. And so if the federal government, whether it's Congress or an act of the president, changes how we receive Medicaid dollars, my concern is not about what's the first hospital to close. It's which 5 hospitals close in the first week.
Sure.
Because I think we have this mentality that if Turtle Lake closes, Pembina gets to stay open because we're diverting resources. And that's not how it works. All those communities need to make sure they have a medical director, nurses, NPs, ambulance drivers. A number of the hospitals have long-term care attached or a part of it. It's a way that they can share services and staff and be efficient with some of that. Some of that. But my fear is as a state who depends on the federal government to fund, right? I think yesterday the report was in the DHS budget was 53 or 55% of our nursing home residents are on Medicaid.
Sure.
So if all of a sudden the funding formula is changed, that impacts a state like North Dakota dramatically. And so how do our grandparents, our loved ones that depend on that care, how do they continue to receive services?
Well, and I had a 100-year farm in our family that we've since retired, but in my great uncle, Uncle Warren and Aunt Betty, they wanted to have access locally. So, they were in Grand Forks for many years. They got moved up to Cavalier, and all of a sudden they're surrounded by friends, loved ones. They can have that community. And on the campaign trail this last cycle, I was surprised at how many times that came up as a concern to that elderly population.
Yeah. Well, and COVID had a huge impact on nursing homes across the state. First, we unfortunately lost way too many North Dakotans, especially older North Dakotans, to COVID. They died. They got sick and died. But nursing homes were impacted by that. So then because nursing homes were kind of seen as a ground zero, families stopped placing loved ones, or loved ones decided they didn't want to go to a nursing home. And so that just had this ripple effect on just having enough people paying, whether they're private pay or Medicaid or however they were paying for it. I think we're getting back to some good numbers, but in the meantime, nursing homes have closed throughout the state. And so you talk about, again, someone being from a certain rural community throughout the state or a region of the state, we're hearing that there's no longer an option in some of those places. So they have to go to a place like Fargo, where they might have a grandchild or a son or daughter that lives there. But the people they grew up with, that they worked with their whole life, that helped them, that they built that community with together, aren't there. So, again, how can we support people to live and grow and age in place, whether that's in their own home or in an assisted living facility, basic care facility, and so forth.
Well, I'm going to bring it back too, because we're talking about rural, and that is important because one hospital might service 40, 50 mile radius. But like last summer, we were in Dickinson, and one of their, elderly care facilities closed. The day we went out for a parade, there was like 45 jobs and 55 beds, and that hurts the urban areas too.
Absolutely.
I don't know how big Dickinson is offhand with population, but I would imagine that they can support 2 55-bed units.
Sure.
So let's pass that. What you got 2 of 11 down?
Yeah. So I've been involved with, trying to help make sure we keep the horses at Theodore Roosevelt National Park.
Okay.
So I've worked with some advocates there, and, being a guy from Fargo, helping out the, Theodore Roosevelt National Park, the advocates for the horses there. What got me interested in that was more that last session, the 2023 session, these advocates were reaching out about the horses, and I saw that it was going to maybe get a little messy. So being an organizer at heart, I just reached out to some of the leaders and, hey, I think there's a more effective way for us to do this.
Great.
Here's how our political process works in North Dakota. Let's start doing some things. And so I've gotten roped into an issue that I knew nothing about before. So it's not necessarily my issue. It's just that I love helping get people engaged in our process. And that's what got me started in politics in the first place.
Well, I love that because we need our representatives to represent the areas that they're from. And if you have constituents reaching out to you for that, then I love that you're representing in that way.
Yeah.
Instead of taking bills from ALEC, from a funded event nationally. Did that pass? Did that get
Yep.
progress?
So yeah, we passed. It's going over to the House. And
Great.
We'll have a hearing in the next couple of weeks. But really, North Dakota's positioned well because of we have Senator John Hoeven, who's been an advocate for the horses, and he's a chief budget writer
Sure.
in Senate Appropriations, and then now former Governor Burgum being the Secretary of Interior, which Interior oversees the national parks.
Sure.
So hoping to be able to use those North Dakota relationships to get a federal designation for the horses to be protected so that they can be managed well and continue to be a living legacy of our state.
You know what I love about us as Democrats, that even though we have disagreements with people, Burgum and Hoeven, there's things that we're connecting on. We're moving forward.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that is there.
Yeah. Well, and so many of our caucus, and we get, I'll say, beat up at times from even people in our own party about this, but we recognize that we're in a Republican supermajority state. So we have to work with Republicans if we want to get first our priorities passed, but also help them get their priorities passed at times. There's division within the Republican Party, and I think it's important for North Dakotans to remember that we still fund public education at 60 to 70% of the cost of per payment, and that's under Republican control.
Sure.
We expanded Medicaid in 2013 under Republican control.
Yeah.
We have, expanded behavioral health and recovery services and things like that. So there are good things we can do when we work together. And the Democratic caucus, regardless of our size, has always been a part of the ruling majority. We may not always get everything we want passed,
Sure.
but we've been able to do the right things for North Dakota for the most part, working in conjunction with, the reasonable Republicans who are representing their communities and trying to do the right thing as well.
I hope I don't put you in a corner with this. So we're talking about reasonable Republicans, and I'm going to focus maybe on a rift in the Republican Party where you're starting to see, I don't know if you want to call it Tea Party or Boshee, or I'll just say the unreasonable and the reasonable.
Sure.
How do you feel about the culture in the House and Senate this cycle? Are we moving forward? It seems like a lot of the culture bills, like you said, have been shot down now.
Yeah, a lot of the we'll call them culture and nonsense bills have been defeated. And again, a lot of the conversation at the beginning of session was always about all these bills. There's so many bills, record number of bills, which was certainly true. We had a lot more bills than we're used to, but we've defeated over 300 bills too, right? And some of that is consolidation of similar ideas, but a lot of that was just looking at something and being like, come on, like this does not do anything to make sure kids are better educated and we're improving math and science scores, or making sure we recruit and retain workforce so that we build roads better. So again, with the work of our Democratic caucus, working with folks in the majority, a lot of those bills have been able to be defeated. There's still a few lingering, and we'll work hard to get those defeated too. But now it's a matter of also being in the second half of session of holding Republicans accountable to the things that are priorities to North Dakotans.
Sure.
We've already, the House defeated the school meals bill.
Yeah.
That's still a priority for most North Dakotans by far. Over 2/3 North Dakotans. A poll just came out recently again saying that they support that. So if we're going to invest in new initiatives, I think that's a worthy one for us to consider, because there's nothing, we put $800 to $1,000 more back in the pocket of families to be able to afford childcare, to be able to save for college, to be able to put towards the priorities of that family, while making sure that kids are fed and probably better behaved in school, more focused. Teachers probably have a more productive class. There's all these benefits, and we focus so much on that large dollar amount, but again, we feed legislators, we get
Yeah.
reimbursed ours. Folks in prison or incarcerated get meals.
Yeah.
So I don't want to compare school children to the same thing, but it's like there are plenty of other places in our state government that we are paying for people's meals. I think a better investment would be to school kids.
That's the first question I ask at the dinner table is, what did you guys have for lunch? And sister has yogurt and Doritos. And that wasn't an option when I grew up. But.
No. Well, I went back a number of years ago. I went to one of the middle schools in Fargo and had lunch in the cafeteria. And, I remember the pizza. It felt like it was this big when I was there, but it's much smaller now. And I suppose I got bigger, so maybe that's why I got smaller, but it's not the same rectangle pizza I remember.
Was that your favorite growing up?
Yeah. I went to Bishop Ryan for a junior high and high school up in Minot, so Catholic school. And a lot of our food was homemade. So certainly pizza was great, but Verona and Anna May are cooks. Like we had homemade caramel rolls or cinnamon rolls with our chili. Italian Dunkers was a big one. They made homemade bread and stuff for our sandwiches or our rolls with when it was open-faced sandwiches or turkey. Yeah, so we were treated pretty well.
We didn't have tater tot hot dish growing up. I had to get it at school. I loved it still to this day.
Sure.
No cheese though, without a doubt. What about property tax? Property tax going to have some big shifts now that we're getting it dialed in, and
yeah, we're narrowing it down. There's a number of ideas out there, and if I recall correctly, at this point there are 3 bills left.
Okay.
The primary one that I think will still get across the finish line in the end is the governor's plan that he proposed at his budget address or state of the state. I don't remember what it was. Working with Representative Nathy from Bismarck, but what that does is increase it's a focus on primary residence only. The other bills talk about other forms, whether it's agriculture, commercial, central utilities. This is focusing on primary residence. So as somebody who owns 2 homes, I would only get the break on my one home that I declare as my primary residence. The other one would not get the break.
Sure.
And so that's the key part. And then it would increase that credit from the $500 people are getting right now to about $1,400 is the
great
number. So for a lot of North Dakotans, that'll wipe out their property tax. So, then, there's certainly conversations about what does that mean in terms of like putting more mills on for school districts or park districts or things like that. And that's all being fleshed out in those bills. But I think it gives a good opportunity to make sure that if people are calling North Dakota home, they're buying a home to live here, that they're getting the benefit first.
I have to give Kelly or Governor Armstrong a lot of credit. I really do like his property tax relief proposal. I like how it's funded. I like the long-term funding mechanism of taking legacy fund dollars and creating a new bucket of money that'll eventually hopefully pay off property tax. But at the same time, I love the credit, because if you're building an $8 million home on the river, you got to know that taxes come with that.
Right.
And a $2,500 property tax relief, if they eliminated property tax for a normal house, and property tax relief for someone who's down on the river is not apples to apples.
Yep, and it's bottom up, which when I heard that, I was like, that is phenomenal. So, we wipe out the people who need it most, their property tax as it's written right now. So you think about, again, people aging in place who might have the home paid off but can't afford the property taxes anymore because they're on Social Security income. You think about young people starting off buying their first home. What better purchasing power can we give them to say, buy a home in, for me, Fargo versus Moorhead, and we'll wipe out some of your property taxes so that you can put more money into improvements in the value of your home, pay off more of your mortgage quicker so you have more equity. But again, it keeps people in North Dakota.
Right. Well, and I'll sound slightly millennial when I say this. I don't think people are looking at the price of their home. I think they're looking at their mortgage payment.
Right.
And if we can drop the escrow amount for property tax, that gets them maybe a better house, maybe a more affordable house. Well, I'm glad that's getting pushed forward. Now, ignorant question, did that move from the House to the Senate, or did that move from the Senate to the House?
It's from the House to the Senate. So the House sent 3 different property tax bills, basically in a way of saying, we're not going to make the big decision. We'll let the Senate take care of it.
Gotcha.
So there will still be a lot of discussion, because the way legislation works, it passes one chamber, it goes to the second chamber. If the second chamber makes any changes, then it goes to a conference committee.
Sure.
And sometimes that can get a little aggressive because there might be too strong opinions about something. But a lot of times that's where you have to work out to make it still move forward and find compromise.
Well, then, again, questions, because the nuances are so interesting. So when these bills get kicked over from the House to Senate or vice versa, can people still give testimony in now
Absolutely.
the Senate Education Committee?
Yeah,
Or,
absolutely. And that's what I love about some of the technology upgrades that have been implemented. We have great staff in the IT department at Legislative Council. And so, yes, so if you were tracking a House bill and now it's moved over to the Senate, you can, and it gets scheduled for a hearing, let's say next week. You can go on, find that bill 1234,
Yep.
and you'd still see all the testimony from that bill
great.
from the House. You can upload your own testimony on the Senate version. Now, the other reality is, so like today, we had a hearing in my one committee. 2 people came and testified on the original version of the bill. Well, we were dealing with the amended version.
Sure.
So they didn't know, but they had saw that this bill, it was an issue they cared about. One was a student who was like, I was just looking at bills. And I realized I was just going to come talk about it. It was great. It was kind of inspiring that this young person wanted to get involved and wasn't a stakeholder in the issue, just someone who cared. And so you can see the different versions, but also then, if it changes from one chamber to the next, you might change your opinion based on how it changed.
Sure.
So, or, you're not as worried about the financial note because it's got brought down. Now you want to make sure the policy is more focused on. So yeah, people can still engage in the process.
So we'll take that a step further. When it goes to a crossover committee, is testimony still allowed there from public input? Or
so the conference committee becomes so the House hearing, the Senate hearing, that is the opportunity for people to provide input.
Okay.
And of course, you can influence people through conversations outside of those hearings. But the conference committee is no longer necessary. It's still public to view and to observe or participate in that way, but it doesn't allow generally for testimony or people to provide. So what happens with those conference committees is that there will be 3 senators, 3 representatives appointed to it. Okay. So those 6 people are who you want to reach out to if there's a bill going to conference committee and it's drastically different or there's small changes, and you can still make changes there. So they theoretically are only talking about the 2 versions, but a lot of times we see bills in conference committee get a whole new face to them. Or, we work fast, and so an issue happens in the world or in our community, and it's like, whoa, we have to find a bill to address this in. Yeah. So then we try to make an amendment and so forth. So yeah, still able to affect change. You just won't be able to show up to testify.
Did 40 days every year of legislative session crossover, did that make it?
I believe that the House has sent us a version or 2 of annual sessions.
Okay.
I don't know the specifics of how those are laid out in terms of if the versions say specific days or say that you should try to meet annually and you figure it out, legislative management. I haven't dug into some of those yet.
That got my mind just going about 100 questions on, is there still going to be crossover? What are, are we going to do annual budgets instead of biannual? Yeah. But I guess time will tell, huh?
Time will tell. And I think just a place for us to start is, a lot of states that meet annually, one year will be a budget year, the next year will be policy year.
Oh, yeah.
So we might have one where it's longer. Maybe we do 60 days in the longer session and we save 20 days to just come in and look at the budget real quickly. Okay. Because the world changes real quickly. Yeah. Right. I've been elected since 2013. What's that? 10 or 5 legislative sessions I've been a part of. I think almost every year we've had a special session because oil tanked or COVID happened or we got all this federal money and we had to figure out how to do it. Right. So having some time to look at our budgets, adjust, we're not perfect. The drafting of bills aren't perfect. There's been times where budget bills have been passed. We leave town and the agency says, that $20 million you earmarked for us, we actually can't touch because of this word here. Oh. And we can't fix that till theoretically 2 years from now. Sure. So I think it's okay for us to try to figure out how to do some small check-ins, and that's a good place to start. Now, most of those states will say that they don't follow the rule anymore of policy versus budget, but they've allowed that creep to happen. I assume naturally that would happen to someone like us too, but at least to start looking at some budget adjustments.
Well, I hope we don't have to look at bathroom door sizes every cycle.
Right. Right.
every year. Hey, I'm gonna just hop. We got a couple minutes left. National, really quick.
Yeah.
Doge, Ukraine. I mean, it's all happening all at once from every direction. What do you think? Is this smoke and mirrors, or is this just how we're gonna? Is this the new normal for the next 4 years?
Well, I certainly hope it's not the new normal, because the anxiety it has given people, the impacts that's happening to North Dakotans and Americans. I mean, I think we have to remember that when someone gets fired from their job as a federal employee or someone who works in the private sector, they lose their health insurance. And they maybe have a family that's depending on that health insurance, and children that need diabetes medication, or their primary caregiver for their aging parent. So it might sound all fun and games, but the impacts of what happens to North Dakotans that are federal employees, but then we think about the impacts to our communities. You know, everyone woke up one day and we didn't know if our universities and our medical facilities were going to get the research dollars, that they are doing important work, again, on diabetes research, on cancer research. Our farmers don't know what kind of payments they may get, if their loans are going to be held accountable to through the USDA stuff. And so this whole idea that government needs to be broken so we can fix it again, I think, is causing a lot of problems, and it's hard to fix. But Doge, I think there's a lot of good things that could happen with Doge if they were looking at it with the intention of saying, let's go find some ways to create more efficiencies.
Right.
There is waste, right? The federal government, the state government, they're big entities. There's things that go out the door that maybe we've always done it that way, and we need to look differently at how we do it. But to go and just cut things off, again, it has real impacts on people's lives. You know, there's a Republican Congress right now. Why is Congress not saying we're going to go in and audit the Department of Commerce or Social Security and look at how we can save money, instead of we're just going to maybe shut off payments, or we're going to let an unelected bureaucrat, Elon Musk, have full accesses? I mean, could you imagine if Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or George W. Bush, for that matter, and just let somebody run amok in our federal government that everyone would have stood by, regardless of which party they're part of? So that's what's disappointing to me, is that I feel like we're just like losing our mind in that decorum. And, you know, I want to remind folks too, things like Social Security, things like the IRS, like USDA rural development. Some of these programs, when we complain about the bureaucracy, it's the bureaucracy that prevents most of the fraud. It's the bureaucracy and that slowness sometimes of things that allows us to make sure we aren't doing the wrong thing, we're paying the wrong people. You know, a lot of that's been improved, and now people are going to lose trust in that system, and especially people who need it most, whether it's their Social Security income, whether it's a Medicaid coverage for their health care. And it's not just going to visit your doctor because you're not feeling well. It's cancer treatments, it's terminal illnesses. It's these are real things that people depend on, and that's when the government plays an important role.
So rural hospitals.
Yeah.
And then the one that really got me today is, if they're really going to start selling off real estate assets. Like, are they going to sell off the federal building in downtown Fargo? That's insane.
At the same time, you had just called back the federal workforce to come to the office.
Yeah.
Now you're going to get rid of the place to work, right? Like, it's infuriating. But again, there could be a valid conversation about, let's do an analysis. We did it at the state. Let's look at all our state buildings. What's needed? We're leasing a lot of space. Is that as important now that we have a lot of people working from home? You can do things the appropriate way, but to just throw things out there and create this chaos is going to be detrimental. I mean, as a real estate agent, I think of if all of a sudden that much retail or office space comes up on the market, people in the private sector, their value drops.
Yeah.
You know, the government, it's not, I mean, these have real impacts to our communities. And, you know, so folks need to really, I think, take a step back and realize, like, there's a right way to do some of this stuff. Why don't we focus on that? Especially when you have the Supreme Court, you have Congress, you have the presidency. You could do this the right way, a million different ways.
Yeah, well, I hope they do. And you know, one thing that I've been saying lately, and it's strange, is that I want Trump to do good. I didn't vote for him. I don't believe in him, but I still want him to do good. I still want him to do good by American people. And I hope that we can see that.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, we all want the best for our president, for our members of Congress, because they're making decisions on our behalf.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate thing is, I don't think Donald J. Trump wants to do well. I don't
Right.
think he wants to be president.
Right.
You know, I think this is just a game, and he's getting rich off of it. And it's unfortunate because it also just devalues real public service. And you think of the legacy of how many presidents before 46 or whatever the number would be when you take out the duplicates.
Yeah.
But our presidents who've done good work and have tried their best to make sure that they improve our communities, our society, and to now see I mean, I think of an entire generation of young people who see that this is what a presidency is. Whereas we grew up watching George W. Bush, we saw Bill Clinton be president, then Barack. I mean, these were people who really were trying the best. We may not have always agreed with them, but they were trying to improve the lives of North Dakotans and Americans.
Yeah, I can't say that I believe that that's what's happening in Washington right now. Well, anyway, Josh, I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for
Any
the time.
last words of wisdom you want to give the public?
Folks,
or
feel free
people?
to reach out. If you're interested in running for office or want to have a conversation, whether it's local or legislative or statewide, Pat and I both have good experience with that. We want to make sure that we're taking advantage of the opportunity to connect with folks, make sure that we are electing people where they are.
Are you really that much taller than me?
I never realized how tall I am.
I don't know what's going on here.
And I'm not even standing up straight. There we go. So
I appreciate you.
Right.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Senator Josh Boschee, for visiting us on uNDeterred this week. You're doing a great job this session, passing a lot of legislation, and we're super proud of you. And thank you, Pat, for bringing Josh to us. Before we talk about some of the events coming up and close out, Lisa, I'm curious what's been on your mind lately?
Well, today has been all about minimum wage. I know the House concurrent resolution got voted down today, which was extremely disappointing to me. I think after almost 16 years of the minimum wage not being touched and increased is really hard on the working class, and it affects a lot of people. And really, I just see a lot of hypocrisy with this. I think when people in terms look at corporations and how much they are continuing to make and how that's increased over the years, but they don't seem to really have that big of a problem with it. And I have a problem when people will say, well, how many businesses and companies are actually paying $7.25 an hour? Well, to me, that's almost them admitting that it's too low, and that the people are just not crazy enough to actually pay that out. And if we continue to not increase, it's not stopping anyone from being able to pay that low. And so that's just been kind of on my mind today. And with it being voted down today, I was happy to see 2 Republicans actually vote for it. So that was encouraging, but obviously not enough to get it to pass. But I just hope that this is something that we don't give up on. I think it is worth it. And it means a lot to the workforce to feel valued by what their employers think they're worth.
I think oftentimes what you hear about when people argue against minimum wage is they say that it's not being paid to, it's being paid to kids, teenagers, whatever. But there are a lot of folks out there who are earning the minimum wage who are the primary breadwinner for their home. And regardless of where someone is in their career or how old they are, everyone deserves a wage that's a fair pay for a hard day's work. And it's clearly the minimum wage is way too low. So it's unfortunate what happened with the session this year, and hopefully we keep at it in the next one and the one after that until we can finally start getting people a little bit more what they deserve. But I can see why you care a lot about that, Lisa.
Well, Lisa, if I can ask too, so we're past crossover, did that pass the House and die in the Senate, or what was the trajectory of that bill? Did that pass out of the Senate and get crossed over to the House?
Yeah, it didn't pass in either. So
yeah, that's really a shame that I guess they couldn't whip the votes in the Republican supermajority to really essentially pay people what they're worth.
In terms of, if for those of you watching or listening, hopefully if you've had your district reorg meeting, you've been to it. I think we're about halfway through, or just maybe over halfway through the districts in the state. I know Pat and Lisa have gone to as many of them as they can, as has our chair, Adam Goldwyn. And it's incredible. Literally every single one of these has way more people than they've ever seen before. The one in Grand Forks recently probably had double the typical number. And when I'm going and speaking at these, I'm asking people if it's their first, for people, it's their very first political meeting. And generally 40%, 50% are raising their hand. It's the very first time they've ever gone to any sort of political meeting. And it's clear that there are things that are happening out there. We're seeing it all across the state anytime we get together and try to make something happen. We do have a couple of more events coming up, and we'd love to see everyone there if these are your districts. This Saturday, the 15th, in Devils Lake is District 15 at 10 a.m. At the Public Library in Devils Lake, 10 a.m. on Saturday for Devils Lake. And then Minot is meeting at noon at the IBEW Hall, I believe up on North Hill. So we'd love to see you if you were in Souris Valley. Those are districts 3, 5, 38, and 40. Lisa's stomping grounds and my hometown. And so I'll be there as well. Senator Josh Boschee, who just interviewed us, will be speaking there as well. So, and then Cheryl Biller, our executive director. And then on Sunday, if you are in District 29, which is kind of that area north of Jamestown, we're in Pekin at the Community Center at 2 p.m. And then also Sunday at 2 p.m. is District 28, which is the southeast part of the state. That's in Oaks at 2 p.m. You can find all of these at our website, Dem-NPL.com, where we encourage you to look for your district. And if you haven't had a chance, please go to one of the reorg meetings. We would love to see you. It's a chance to actually learn what can you do to fight back against the insanity that we're seeing in Bismarck and in Washington, D.C. So we would love to see you there. Pat, why don't you close us out this week?
Well, before I jump into it, I got to do a couple shout outs. First of all, these podcasts have a lot of back cutting kind of behind the scenes. And our good friend Will Thompson's been doing all the clip work that you don't see that helps make this successful. So we got to give a good shout out to Will. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for the time that you're putting in. And then I also got to say, Jamie, you mentioned Devils Lake. No, that's not a typical destination that I'm headed to out of Bismarck for the weekend, but Devils Lake actually just got a new movie theater that opened up. And I think that's kind of a nice piece of economic development that we can all tout. So if you guys are cruising to Devils Lake, make sure you check out the movie theater. Some money was just put into it by a group of local investors, and I hope they succeed because they're putting their neck out there for us. And on that note, what's been on my mind this week is the term belief. And what do we believe? And the belief that I matter, regardless of what I do or don't achieve, has been on my mind. Oftentimes we're looked at our input to society. But what about the belief that we all deserve to be loved, whether we've been hurt or maybe we've been hurt by somebody else? What about the belief of hope? And hope. Hope is free and empowering. Sometimes it can be crushing too. Now, I live in a space where I believe that things can get better and that I can get better and that we will get better. We are healing. And oh man, let's talk about that. Belief in yourself, belief in one another. That's absolutely fundamental to being alive. And look, if you can do that, if each of you can truly do that, nobody can rip us apart. I believe in myself. I believe in all of us. And I believe in what we can do together. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.